I'm ready.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the people here in the audience and to the online people. Sorry, I always turn to the screen, but the camera is in front of me. It's something counterintuitive. Yeah. So today it's a big pleasure to introduce Professor George Azzopardi from the University of Groningen. And it's probably, at least the Stellenbosch people know, Groningen and Stellenbosch are good friends and partners. So it's very nice to have you here and start a conversation on future plans. Yeah. George did his master's at Queen Mary University in London and did his PhD in computer science at University of Groningen. And over some steps, he ended up again at University of Groningen, where he's now an associate professor in the, now I need to get it right, in the School of Digital Society, Technology and AI, which is probably the equivalent of our School of Data Science and Computational Thinking. And he's in charge of applications of AI within the school. Yeah. And today he will share with us some of his recent research. Yeah. And everybody online knows the rules of the game. If you have questions, please use the Q&A. And at the end of the talk, we will make a plan. Yeah. So George, please, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Professor Petruccioni, for this kind introduction. It is my great pleasure to be here once again in Stellenbosch. The first time I came here was 13 years ago for holidays with my wife, and we immediately fell in love with this place, and we promised ourselves that we should visit this place if we have kids later on in life. And well, it happened. And first I visited last year by myself, already Trienko, my collaborator, sitting in front. And here I am again this year, where I also brought my kids and wife this time. We are having a wonderful time here. So my name is George Azzopardi. I'm associate professor in pattern recognition. Specifically, I'm interested in brain-inspired pattern recognition. Oh, okay. Which means we try to learn from the conclusions and findings in neurophysiology, specifically on the visual system of the mammalian brain. And we try to simulate some properties as much as we can for computer vision methodologies. Well, you know how powerful the mammalian brain is. It's such a small unit compared to our big computer systems nowadays. And it is still much more powerful in terms of generalization ability, for example. You learn from a small amount of data and is able to generalize to different distributions from what the brain has learned from. So this is what makes me very interested in this line of research. And as a result, I'm interested to develop algorithms that produce high energy efficient computing. As applications are concerned, I have broad interest in the fields that I mentioned on the slide, spanning from forensics, medical, radio astronomy, and more. I will be showing you some applications as I go along in this presentation. Here is a picture with some of my PhD students, one of which, Stephen Maceto, is sitting in front. He's our double PhD student. We have a double PhD arrangement between Stellenbosch and Groningen. He just moved here like a month ago, I think, Stephen. So he spent already 2 years in Groningen. I will be showing some of his research output also in this talk. And yeah, I'm happy for him that he found his place here in Stellenbosch to continue with his studies. So yeah, I come from Malta, which is a little island between north of Africa and Sicily, or the ball of Italy, basically. Then I moved to, now I'm working in the Netherlands, which is somewhere up there. So I moved from nice beaches to nice canals, and now I'm here with this beautiful scenery. Okay. Well, let me give a brief introduction about the university, first of all. This year we're celebrating 410 years. As I was saying to Professor Petruccioni, there is a long history in Groningen. This was founded by, well, Groningen and Friesland are known mostly for farming and agriculture. And well, many years ago, a consortium was formed to build a university to start educating their children in their own provinces, rather than having to send them in Amsterdam and other big cities. As you can notice, it's also known as the capital city of bicycles, by the way. There are thousands or even millions of bicycles in Groningen. Something about my faculty is science and engineering. It consists of 11 institutes, which I show over here. I belong to the first one, which is the Bernoulli Institute for Mathematics, Computer Science, and AI. So each institute consists of multiple departments. It can be 2 departments, 3, 4, you name it. Here are some stats about our faculty. And as you can see here, we are proud to have also 2 Nobel Prize winners from our faculty. One is Fritz Zernike, who won the Nobel Prize in physics, I think somewhere in the mid-1900s. And just recently, only 8 years ago, we have Professor Ben Feringa, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. So as I said, each institute is composed of multiple departments. This is ours, Bernoulli Institute. We have the mathematics, computer science, and AI. And then each department is again composed of multiple research groups. So the computer science is made up of these 7 research groups. And I belong to the group Information Systems, which is the most recently formed group. We are quite heterogeneous, actually, in our research interests. As I said, I'm more into pattern recognition, which typically it belongs to the intelligent systems. And this is where I did my PhD, by the way, in that group. But because, to avoid kind of inbreeding in our research studies, we prefer that I move to another research group. Okay, so something about our group. Well, this is one of our latest pictures, although it doesn't include all our members there. So we are 5 faculty members. Professor Dimka Karastoyanova, the one in the middle, is the head of our group. And then, well, we are 4 more academic staff. There is Fatih here and Fadi, but the others are missing, unfortunately. And the last time I counted, we are 15 PhD students and 2 postdocs. Okay. Let me give you a brief overview of some of my ongoing projects, PhD projects. So I start with this one, which is on biomedical image analysis. We are collaborating with the Department of Nanoanatomy at the University Medical Hospital in Groningen. What you see here is an image obtained from a biopsy of the pancreas of a mouse produced by electron microscopy. This is a very large image. In fact, it is 8 gigapixel, and it is made up also by stitching multiple images together. If you zoom in, you can see the boundaries of these tiles. And well, what you see here, there are many subcellular structures within cells that are of great interest for biologists to try to find correlation between them and certain pathologies. In this particular case, they are trying to find if there are any correlations between mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of cells, and diabetes. So as you can imagine, these images are very hard to label them manually. So it would take days or weeks for even one image to label it manually. So they need, well, intelligent algorithms to help them do this task as automatic as possible. And this is what we are doing in this project. We are developing algorithms that can segment certain subcellular structures. Here I show a few of them. So the color is indicating the segmentation that our algorithms can do. Another project which has just concluded earlier this year was using egocentric vision, essentially having wearable cameras that you can wear somewhere on your chest or with your waist, so that it can take it, well, it can stream the scene in front of the user. And we did experiments to see if these cameras can be used to detect and predict falls from these video streams. Another PhD project, which is ongoing, is in collaboration with the University of Salerno in Italy. Here you see a social robot, we call them, where you can think of, let's say, like museums where people can interact with such robots for directions and for other information, you name it. But the challenge here is to allow the robot to interact based on the demographics of the user interacting with the robot. For example, if there is a child, the robot should use a different language than when interacting with an elderly person. And you can think of other demographics as well. So we are focused on doing face analysis from video streams. Here I have a short video showing a snippet about a project that is starting soon in July. This is in collaboration also with the University Medical Hospital, with the Movement Disorders Department specifically. And the idea here is to be able to diagnose certain movement disorders. We call them hyperkinetic movement disorders, which are fast, unintentional movements that certain patients suffer, unfortunately. The way it is done at the moment is by wearing these individual sensors in strategic places and then monitor the signals from certain exercises. But our question now is, can we do this by videos? Can we avoid sensors? Because if we can achieve that, then the patients do not need to come to the hospital. So they can do it from a webcam, more convenient for the patients. And the service can even be open up for the world internationally. So here I show you a snippet of what kind of exercises these patients need to do in order to monitor the progression of their diseases. Well, she's a postdoc candidate, by the way. It's not a real patient. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to show her on the screen. Well, and here we have another example of a different exercise. Yes, where they need to touch their nose for a number of times. Okay. Yeah. Another project which we started recently is the detection, maybe you know the term deepfake nowadays, with deep learning. Of course, it's a tool that can be used well, in a beneficial way, but also in a way that can infringe some security problems. And face morphing attack is one of them that concerns mainly systems that depend on face recognition. So the risk here with face morphing attack is that you can essentially steal the identity of another person. If you find a face image from social media that already looks a little bit like you can use deepfake algorithm to generate another face that looks like both users and also preserving all the biometric features of both faces. So you can essentially use that face to create an identity, a new identity, of course, in an illicit way. And this is something that the Dutch Driving Authority is trying to prevent. So they have funded us a project to develop algorithms for this purpose. And the idea here is to leverage what we call the camera signature noise, which is not visible with our naked eye. The small imperfections that happen during the manufacturing process of the sensors inside the camera, they manifest themselves into what we call sensor pattern noise. If you take a picture with your shutter closed, you expect to have a completely black image, right? But if you zoom in, it will not be the case. If you look at the matrix of pixels, they will not be all zeros. So the values that you see is actually the signature of which we call the camera sensor pattern. So we are trying to leverage this type of noise in order to match whether the received image from the photographer and the reference images of the licensed cameras match. If they do not match, it means that there is something illicit has been done in between. This project was actually the result of another European project called FORENSIC. It was a European consortium which was mainly focused on developing intelligent algorithms for law enforcement agencies to fight against child sexual exploitation material. And in Groningen, we were responsible to develop algorithms to detect the cameras that were used to capture given images. So the idea was that if the law enforcement agencies have warrants to go in certain places of accused offenders, and they find cameras, for example, in their places, then they can check whether certain images were actually taken by those cameras. And based on this, they can build stronger cases against those accused offenders. And this work resulted us in a prestigious award last year by the recently Nobel Prize winner, Professor Ben Feringa himself. This is me with my PhD student, Guru Benabaktula. And last, which I will elaborate later on, this is the joint PhD project that we have with Stellenbosch. Stephen is the PhD student here. We started it 2 years ago. We are also collaborating with Astron. It's a big company. It's one of the world-leading companies in radio astronomy in the Netherlands. So we are applying visual pattern recognition and machine learning methodologies for radio galaxy classification and retrieval problems. I will elaborate more as I go along. Okay, one last thing in the introduction. I'm also coordinating the applied AI team within the research school, Jantina Tames, which the aim here is to stimulate more and more interdisciplinary collaborations, not only within our university, but also with the private sector, as I mentioned, like the Dutch Driving Authority, but also with external universities. So we started it only like November or December last year. So it's still in its infancy in a way, but we have high aims for these schools. Okay, so the topic of today is COSFIRE, a trainable and explainable filter-based approach to visual pattern recognition. I'm sure that many of you or all of you have heard about deep learning, machine learning, and end-to-end pipelines where the feature descriptors are being learned directly from these deep learning paradigms. So yeah, from the ongoing projects that I have, we also make use of deep learning, of course. But today I'm going to show you another simpler, in a way, paradigm that is also quite effective in many applications. And two of the biggest advantages of this paradigm is that it is, first of all, it is much simpler. It is explainable. With deep learning, many of the paradigms are black box methodologies, are difficult to interpret what's going on. And they are also, and this paradigm is also very energy efficient. So we need much less computational resources to achieve the same goal. So let me start with a very simple example. Okay, maybe a comparison to other conventional paradigms. You may have heard about handcrafted features. This was the paradigm before deep learning started. So up to, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, every now and then there is a new descriptor in the literature, like SIFT descriptor, LBP, HOG, you name it. People were coming up with different types of descriptors. They used to be called handcrafted features. So this paradigm, you can think of it as somewhere in between. These are not handcrafted, as I will show you as I go along, but they are not learned in an end-to-end fashion like deep learning. So let me start with an example. So suppose we have this image with just 3 corners, and we are interested to have an algorithm that is able to detect this type of corner. So the user can select this prototype. We call it the prototype pattern. You can click on the corner, for example, and specify a radius to show how big your pattern is. Okay? So here is a zoomed-in version of the pattern of interest. And the idea then is to determine the most dominant orientations and their mutual spatial arrangement. This is what we want to model from this prototype pattern of interest. And I am indicating the orientations by these ellipses. So here, because we have 2 lines, I show a circle. Otherwise, I show a vertical ellipse, and this is a horizontal. So let's see how we can do this. Yes, and this actually was inspired by some work in neurophysiology by Azzopardi in the late 90s, where they created a systematic set of visual stimuli as you see up here, and they used them with macaque monkeys while they were anesthetized. They did single cell recordings. And they actually found out that in the area V4 of the mammalian brain, there are neurons that are selective for certain corners and certain orientations. So at the bottom here, it is the same data set, but their brightness is based on the response of the single neuron that is under investigation here. So in this case, this single neuron seems to be selective for this type of corner, which has like 90 degrees aperture in this orientation. It also responds to similar corners, maybe it deviates slightly from the preferred one, but then the response fades for corners that are completely different than the preferred one. So this shows that there is orientation selectivity for certain curvatures. Okay, so let's continue with the configuration of our COSFIRE filter. So here is the given pattern. What we do then, we apply a bank of Gabor filters. These are known to be orientation selective filters. So this is a two-dimensional filter which is able to detect vertical lines. So when you convolve this filter with this image, this is the response map that you get. Okay, so as expected, it highly responds to the vertical line, but not to the other one. And similarly, we have a horizontally oriented Gabor filter, which responds to horizontal lines, and many others in between for different orientations. So then we have a stack of response maps from this bank of Gabor filters, and then we superimpose the stack of response maps, and we get this image in this case. So the next step is to consider a number of circles. In this case, for the sake of the example, I only show one, and then find the local maximum responses along this circle. So here I plot the one-dimensional plot of the responses along this circle. And here we only have two local maximum points, A and B, which correspond to these two locations. The next step is to extract 4 parameters from each of these local maxima. 2 of them are the polar coordinates, which I show here, the radius and the angle. And the other 2 parameters are the Gabor filter parameters, which are the scale and the orientation of the Gabor filter. So in the end, our model, if you will, is a set of tuples where each tuple corresponds to the properties of each of these 2 local maximum points. Okay, so here we are. So we have the lambda and the theta, which are the scale and the orientation of the Gabor filter. We call them the line properties. It's about the thickness and the orientation. And the other 2 parameters are about the position, so with respect to the center of the filter. Okay, so that concludes the configuration of our filter, actually. I kept it simple on purpose. Later on, I will show you how it can be even more complicated, but for now, let's keep things simple. Now, how can we use this filter to actually detect patterns that are similar to the prototype pattern that we used for its configuration? So what we do for a given image, we loop on our list of tuples. So remember, in this case, we only had 2 tuples, one for each of these 2 local maxima. And for each tuple, we apply a Gabor filter with the line properties indicated in that tuple, the lambda and the theta, the scale and the orientation. And then we get the Gabor response map. So the first one was responsible for the vertical lines. And then in order to introduce some tolerance with respect to the preferred orientation, we blur the Gabor response map. This is why you see them a little bit thicker here, the same regions. And then we also shift this response map in the direction opposite of the polar coordinate. So this was, let's say this was 10 pixels away from the center. So we shift everything 10 pixels towards in the south direction. Now we do the same with the other tuple. So now we have a Gabor filter that is selective for the horizontal lines. So we get the response map, then we blur it. That's why you see the thicker regions. And then we shift it now in this direction, to the east. Finally, the final response map is achieved by a simple multiplication between all the response maps, all the blurred and shifted response maps. So here we have the two blurred and shifted response maps. Well, this operator here is indicating multiplication. In effect, we use the geometric mean operation. It's essentially multiplication. And when you apply this operation, you get this final filter response map. And in fact, these two blobs are really indicating the position of the two corners that are similar, this and this. Okay. Okay, I kept things very simple here on purpose so that I can explain all the steps in as simple as possible. So if I can revise a little bit, so we call this approach a trainable approach because we are not really handcrafting on how the filter should look like. The structure of the filter is based on the prototype pattern that is presented to the algorithm. Okay. Now let's continue to see some properties. So suppose now we create a similar data set that was used for neurophysiology in a systematic way with different apertures and orientation. And we configure a filter which is selective for this corner. Then if we apply it to the same data set, well, the maximum response is achieved for the one that was used for its configuration, but we also achieve some responses for vertices that looks quite similar to the preferred one, but then 0 responses to the ones that deviate substantially from the preferred one. And then without going into the technical details, we can also manipulate the model of the filter to make it selective for a specific orientation. So if we wanted to detect also the same corners, but at a different orientation, we only need to apply one simple operation in our model, and that makes it selective for the orientation of preference. And if we do this systematically for different orientations, we can even achieve rotation invariance with the same filter. So here in the middle, you see that we achieve roughly the same response for all vertices with an aperture of 90 degrees, irrespective of their orientation. And then the response starts, decreasing as we deviate from the preferred aperture. Okay. So, okay, some points before I show some applications on this. So COSFIRE stands for combination of shifted filter responses. The input is based on Gabor filters. In effect, they can be any orientation selective filters. We use Gabor because they are quite popular in computer vision and mathematics. Then we blur them and shift the responses, and finally we multiply. So all the steps are quite easy steps. It is trainable because it can be configured with any given local contour pattern. I will show you more examples later. And it is interpretable. This is a very important property. So when you see the structure of the filter, you can easily understand, it's quite intuitive, what the pattern of interest it is selected for. Okay, let's make things a little bit harder now. Let's take an application from medicine. So here we see a retinal image, and in optometry, and they are interested to analyze the vessel tree of the retina. In effect, the vessel tree is not only useful to detect eye-related diseases, but you can also detect problems with the cardiovascular system, for instance. And even if you have diabetes, you can also see tracks in your vessel tree of the retina. Okay, so let's continue. And one important property in the vessel tree is to monitor the progression of the bifurcations. The bifurcations are the points, the intersection points where new vessels start forming. Okay. Now let's see how we can do this using the COSFIRE approach. Well, this would be the preferred result to obtain. So what we can do, if we already have a labeled data set of bifurcations, we can select a random one from the training set, or else we can ask the user, okay, show us the pattern that you are interested in. And the user can select this one, for example. Here I show a zoomed-in version of the same pattern. And then now we're going to use this pattern to configure a COSFIRE filter for it. And we apply exactly the same approach that I showed you for the corner. So first we superimpose the Gabor response maps. Then we consider the Gabor responses along a circle. We find the local maximum points along that circle, which are indicated with these 3 red points. And then we extract the properties of the Gabor filters that achieve the maximum response there. So the ellipses are indicating the orientation, and the size are indicating the thickness of that line. Then you remember we are doing the blurring function so that we introduce some tolerance in the preferred orientation. Otherwise, the filter would only be able to detect the exact pattern, and that would not be very useful. So in the previous example, I showed that we cannot use one circle, but in effect, we can use as many circles as we want. So if the pattern is complicated, it is advisable to use more circles. So here I'm using another inner circle to find more local maximum points. And again, we extract their properties. And I'm also using the point in the middle. So here now we have a COSFIRE filter, which consists of 7 tuples, 1 for each point. And this is the definition of our filter now. So we have a list indicated with these curly brackets of tuples, where each tuple corresponds to one of these points. Okay, so we have the lambda and theta indicating the line properties, and the rho and phi indicating the polar coordinates with respect to the center. Okay. Then, okay, I cropped a small part of the input image to demonstrate the application of this. So first, we filter with the Gabor functions, we blur the responses, we shift them, and finally we combine with the weighted geometry mean. And this is the final filter output that we get with this COSFIRE filter, where the brightest blob is indicating the pattern that was used to configure it, rightly so. But we also achieve, well, strong enough responses for patterns that indeed look like this pattern. So we have one here, and one here. So even though they are not perfectly the same like this one, we still get strong responses. And nothing for the rest. Okay. Well, you can apply this to the whole image, and then these are the bifurcations that we detect in this case. But of course, it was not sufficient to detect all the bifurcations in this case. So what you do in a training fashion, you pick another bifurcation that was not detected with the first one and use it to configure another one. Oh yeah, before going there, so here I'm showing that if we apply it in a rotation tolerant mode, we are able to detect so many bifurcations, but we can also apply it in rotation and scale tolerant mode, and we detect even more, and also rotation, scale, and reflection tolerant, and we detect most of them actually. But still, there are still some of them that are missing. So we pick one that was missed from the first one, which happened to be this one now. This is the zoomed-in version, and we configure a new COSFIRE filter for it. Okay, and here is the structure. So as I said, it is quite interpretable. When you see this visualization, you can easily say to which pattern this filter is selected for. Okay? Now, if you apply that filter to the same image, these are the detections that you get. If you merge all together, we are able to detect almost all of them already. This was, in a way, an easy application, also used to demonstrate the concept of this approach. But then this can be, the training can be done in an iterative fashion until all patterns of interest are detected in the training or the validation set. Okay. So here, in this case, with only 5 COSFIRE filters, we were able to detect all the bifurcations in the training set. And then, of course, you apply it on a test set, and then you can measure the performance metrics, as we usually do in pattern recognition applications. So that was an application which which aim was to demonstrate the application of such filters. So a completely different application now, it's image classification. Okay, I use the MNIST dataset, but it's more a concept of image classification now rather than localizing a specific pattern of interest. So probably everybody knows about this dataset. It's one of the oldest one in computer vision. And the idea is to, of course, recognize which digits we have. So with deep learning nowadays, they achieve somewhere between 99.6 or 0.7. But let's see how we can do this with COSFIRE filters. We do not need a very sophisticated end-to-end learning approach to achieve very high results. Yeah, the approach that I'm going to use is inspired by a concept in neurophysiology known as population coding, which means that the shape of a particular pattern, such as this one, is composed of, well, a set of the responses of a set of neurons, where one neuron may be selected for this type of vertex, another one for this curvature, another one for this curvature, and so forth. So their collective response is termed as population coding, which gives the signature of a particular shape. And we're going to apply the same concept for image classification. So let's see how we can do this. So in the configuration stage, or the training phase, if you will, we simply pick random images from the training set. Here I show 4 examples from different digit classes. And then for each randomly picked image, we again choose a random location. Here is indicated by these plus markers. And then we consider the local pattern around these randomly selected locations. So for this one, we are considering this part of the digit, for this one, the upper part, and so forth. And here, these are the patterns for which the COSFIRE filters are selective. So in this case, we only have a filter which is selective for this curvature. And yeah, the same for the other images. So now we can configure as many filters as we want by using randomly selected local patterns from the training set. Okay, how do we apply them? So how do we form a shape descriptor with this approach? Well, for a given image, we apply all the configured COSFIRE filters. Then we take the maximum responses of the filters, irrespective of the location, irrespective where the maximum was, to keep it simple. So if we have, let's say, 1,000 filters in total, every image will then be described by 1,000 elements, the maximum of each filter. And this is what I indicate here. So for k number of COSFIRE filters, we form a k element feature vector. And once we have a feature vector, then we can use any machine learning algorithm to train a classifier. Okay. In this case, I'm using a simple SVM with a linear kernel. And we were able to achieve very high recognition rates that are very close to what the most sophisticated deep learning can achieve. So with only 500 filters, we were already close, more than 99%. But then we wanted to see, okay, where is the saturation point? Okay. And well, these are the results. Any questions so far? Yeah. If you have one. I would need to think about this. Well, imagine you have more than 2 points. So how are you going to keep the mutual spatial arrangement between all points? But we can have a discussion about this. You gave me some food for thought. Well, here's another similar application. These are Farsi digits. This is to demonstrate that this approach is not intrinsic, is not specific to a certain application. It is versatile enough that it can be applied to any application, actually. So it is just different patterns. And we apply the same pipeline, and also we achieve quite high results for this data set as well. A completely different application now, just to demonstrate that we can have filters that are even more, well, selective for more complicated shapes, not just corners or bifurcations, but they can be traffic signs, for example. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter what prototype pattern you give it. Well, the algorithm will find all the dominant contours and models their mutual spatial arrangement with those four properties: the polar coordinates, their thickness, and their orientation. And here, these are reconstructions of the filters of the patterns that they are selected for. Well, once you have an image, think of autonomous driving nowadays. You can have, this is the contour map achieved by orientation selective filters. And this is the output of our COSFIRE filters that were able to detect these two traffic signs in not an easy scene, actually. There is a lot of texture here and a lot of texture here. So this was quite a nice result. And then, of course, we applied it on the whole data set and also demonstrated that we can achieve that it is also effective for such applications. So again, this application is to demonstrate that the complexity of the pattern of interest is not important for the COSFIRE filter. It can be from a simple line to corner, bifurcations to traffic signs. Well, another application which is related to our ongoing project as well on social robotics. So what I show here, these are the average male and female faces of a big data set. Well, this is why they look a little bit blurred, because they are averaged. But visually, we may see already some subtle differences between the two genders. It looks like females tend to have more rounded faces and, of course, longer hair over there. But anyway, we do not try to influence the COSFIRE filters. We just use the face images from the training set, as I will show you, such as this one. And we use exactly the same approach that we use for the MNIST digit recognition problem. So this means that we pick a random image from the training set first. Then we pick a random location in that image. In this case, I choose this one on purpose for demonstration purpose. So this is the Gabor response map superimposed. And this is the reconstruction of the COSFIRE filter, which is selected for this pattern over here. Now, when we apply this filter to the same image, this is the response map that we get. I show it inverted on purpose for clarity. So the darker it is, the higher the response in this case. Okay? So the darkest location is actually at the exact location of the local pattern that was used for its configuration. But we also achieve responses where the pattern in those locations are quite similar to the pattern of interest. Fair enough. So if we look at these three horizontal lines here, they can feature in other places of the face. And that's okay. So let's continue with this approach. So then, in order to make the descriptor a little bit more sophisticated, instead of simply taking the maximum response now to form the descriptors, we used another paradigm known as spatial tiling, where we tile the response image in 3 layers. So first we consider it as a whole, then in 2 by 2, and then in 4 by 4. And then from each tile, we take the maximum response. So in the first image, when it is considered only one tile, we find the maximum, which is this one. When we consider 2 by 2 tiling, we find the maximum in every tile, and so forth. So eventually, in total, we have 21 tiles, 1 plus 4 plus 16. So a descriptor then is made up of 16 values per COSFIRE filter, 21 values per COSFIRE filter. So if we have k number of COSFIRE filters, the descriptor will be 21 times k elements. Okay. And then again, once you have the feature vector, you can use your machine learning algorithm of preference to do the classification. Again, in this case, we used SVMs to keep it simple with the chi-squared kernel in this case. And we demonstrate that we can achieve. When we did the study, we were well, we achieve the highest results of the state of the art. Okay. One question that you may ask is, but how do we know how many concentric circles do we need? How sophisticated should we make the COSFIRE filter? You remember, for the traffic signs, we used more because we knew the patterns were much more complicated. But still, should we leave this up to the user, or should we try to have it automatic? And we address this question as well in one of our papers. So what we do is, let us start with a filter with a high number of concentric circles first, so that we end up with a list of many tuples. Okay? And then we use techniques like they are being used for feature selection. You try to find the best subset of tuples that maximize your performance. Okay, this is exactly what we do with feature selection in tabular data. So in fact, we used genetic algorithms for this. It's one paradigm that is used for optimization problems. And the optimization here is to find the minimum subset that maximizes the performance. Right? And well, we used an application from machine vision to demonstrate this concept, where in this case, we are using a milling machine here, which has these cutting tools. And the idea is to have a camera when the machine is in a resting position and analyze how sharp the cutting tools are as it is working, as it is operating. So, yeah. Okay, so here we have an example. This is one of the cutting tools. So we can use the center of it and then use a number of circles to configure, in this case, a very complicated COSFIRE filter with every ellipse is indicating a tuple. Okay? But maybe with only few of them is already enough to have good detection. But which are those tuples? And here I'm demonstrating one particular subset of this big set of tuples. So in fact, if we use the first filter, this one, it is so specific that it is not able to generalize enough. It was only able to detect the same one that was used for its configuration and only another one. And this is not good enough. If we choose only a subset of it, we were able to detect much more, almost all of them in this case. And they were all correct. So this also demonstrates that applying like feature selection techniques to find the best tuples of this approach would also help to identify which are the most important contours in your pattern of interest. Yeah, and these are the reconstruction of the filters that are used to detect these patterns. Well, and this is the full set that we use in this case. These are the subsets that were eventually chosen from the full set. Okay. So far, I showed you how COSFIRE filters can be used for shape-selective processing based on contours. But if we try to apply this concept in every application, we may not be successful enough. Imagine we have images where they are mostly characterized by color and by diffuse colors, such as this famous picture of Marilyn Monroe. Trying to extract the contours in this case, we would not be successful to extract a decent pattern like this one. So we extended this approach that instead of using only contours, we also make use of blobs. And we're using this example just for demonstration purposes. So imagine we have this, well, funny pattern, 2 green eyes, a blue nose, and so forth. And again, we use a point of interest in the middle here, and we delineate how big our pattern of interest is. And then we simply apply blob detection operators instead of orientation selective filters now. And again, use their response maps instead of the Gabor response maps. And we can use that to end up also with a list of tuples, but this time characterized by blob detectors rather by orientation selective filters. And here this is a reconstruction of based on the filter that was configured from this image, which, well, I think it is more interpretable than many small kernels that are being learned by deep learning. So we applied this approach on difficult data sets, such as traffic signs, in which some of them are even very difficult for humans. In fact, humans were also not able to achieve 100% in all of them. And with our proposed method, we were very close to a very famous deep learning approach. And this is another example of a difficult data set, well, recognizing butterflies in complex scenes. Okay, so far, COSFIRE filters I showed you, they are considered as one layer architectures, where the input is the output either of Gabor filters or of blob detectors. And then we combine their output in one operation with geometric mean, and we get our response. But we can make this architecture as deep as we want it, if I want to use the same terms of deep learning. So we can call them hierarchical COSFIRE filters now. So imagine you have a COSFIRE filter whose output is the input of another COSFIRE filter. Let's see how this can work out in other applications. So here I show some retinal images and palm prints, which are known to be effective for biometrics. You can identify people from their retinal vessel structures or from their palm. And here is the approach that we're using. So in the first layer, we apply these two COSFIRE filters, one that is selective for Y bifurcations, we call them, and one that is selective for lines. And then their output, so this is the input image. These are the COSFIRE filters, and these are the response maps of each of these two filters. Then we're using these response maps again to configure. So we take the local maximum points of these response maps, and we use them to configure another COSFIRE filter by extracting the mutual spatial positions between the local maximum points. So in the first layer, we have COSFIRE filters which extract the line properties and their mutual spatial position. And in the second layer, we extract the type of COSFIRE filters, whether it's Y or line, and also the polar coordinates. And this, you can make it as complicated as possible. You can have it 3 layers, 4 layers, and so forth. So here, I'm not sure whether it is visible enough. We have a point in the middle, which takes input from actually 5 COSFIRE filters. And each COSFIRE filter is either Y selective filter of this type or a line. And this was sufficient to achieve very high recognition rates in a difficult data set of retinal images. Okay, here I show a zoomed in version. So this filter, this 2-layer COSFIRE filter is taking input from a bifurcation filter here, a line filter here, and so forth. So here we have the legend. So we are not restricted to have only 1 layer COSFIRE filters, but as complicated as we want. Eventually, if we apply that 2-layer architecture to this image, this is the response map that we obtain. So this blob here is indicating the location where it achieves the maximum response. And you only get this for the image that is, of course, similar to the reference image that was used for its configuration. So, of course, we have to show this, that it works on a test data set, and we were able to achieve quite high results on multiple data sets. These are known benchmark retinal image analysis. Any questions so far? Okay. One property that we investigated in this approach is how robust is it to adversarial attacks, this approach? Adversarial attacks are attacks where the input image is manipulated in such a way to fool the underlying system. There are those that are known as the white box attacks or black box attacks. With white box, you already know what the architecture of your underlying deep learning model, for example, is. And the black box is when you don't know it. And one particular attack is the boundary adversarial attacks, where the input image is manipulated in such a way that it makes it look like it belongs to another class. So we tried to apply this approach, this kind of attack to our approach. And the only way we could fool our approach is when the image is corrupted quite a lot, actually. I'm not sure whether you can see the noise here. Let me see if I can zoom. Okay. So here the vessels are hardly visible anymore because of the noise that was added. And so this was the only way they could fool our approach, but this is a very easy way to detect such an attack. If you do some histogram analysis, you can already say whether it's a genuine image or not. And we demonstrated this in our work. Other approaches were not as robust as our COSFIRE paradigm in this case. Another application related to the electron microscopy that I showed earlier. So in this case, the challenge is to segment the subcellular structures known as the mitochondria within cells. And of course, there are many already pre-trained segmentation models like UNet, SegNet, you name it, that are able to achieve this result from this. But the problem here is that they were not able to delineate, to find exactly the wall between these mitochondria. And this is very important because the biologists need to count, to analyze the shape of each mitochondria, and so forth. So in this case, we also used, well, deep learning approaches to get this result first, because this helps us to find where such regions are, first of all. But then apply our COSFIRE approach to find these boundaries within these segmented connected components. 5 minutes. Okay. Let me try to speed up a little bit. Okay, and this brings me now to our project, which is, yeah, as I said, Stephen is our PhD student. There's Trienko Grobler, and it's also in collaboration with Professor Dirk de Villiers. Probably everybody knows him here. But I'm not sure if you know Stefan Weinholz, who is from the Netherlands, the Astron company, who also has an extraordinary professorship in Stellenbosch. And Dimka is the head of our group in Groningen. So in this project, well, I focus on our recent publication where, no, sorry, I start with these two publications first. We started with writing a review first. This was the first task for Stephen. And then we also demonstrated how we can use supervised hashing for fast retrieval of radio image cubes. But in our last, I come back to this. In our last work, we demonstrated how we can use COSFIRE filters for the classification of radio galaxies. And the idea to use these COSFIRE filters emerged from the result of our review paper, which showed that one of the challenges in this case is dealing with orientation invariance of radio galaxies. Of course, nowadays there are convnets that can deal with that as well, but they are very computationally intensive. These are equivariance, known as equivariance convolutional neural networks. So let's see how we can apply exactly the same approach now for this problem. So in this data set, we are using a benchmark data set actually from this study, which contains, well, this much of images. And we have 4 classes: the band, the compact, FR1, and FR2, as they are known. And here are some images coming from this data set. Well, unfortunately, this is quite an old data set, apparently. And the problem is that with the recent surveys, it's very hard to get the ground truth labeling. So this is the only data set that we could use that allowed us to compare our results with other studies. So here I show some examples of these 4 classes. This is the compact class, which is a round object in the middle. And these are FR1 examples. As you can see, they can have different orientations, of course, but they have 2 blobs and 1 in the middle. And this is the other class, and so forth. And this is the superposition of all images in these data sets. Okay, let us see how we can apply the COSFIRE filters now for this approach. So in this case, because the images are already cropped in the center of the objects of interest, we simply take the center point of each image as the center of the filter for configuration. And then we consider a few concentric circles around the center point and configure COSFIRE filters based on these blob detectors. So what I show here, these are the response maps of what we call the center of the OG response maps that detect dark to bright transitions and vice versa. I think I skipped. Okay. So here I'm zooming in on one of them now. So here I'm superimposing the DOG center off and center on responses. We consider some concentric circles and take the local maximum points. Exactly the same paradigm that I used for the other applications. And for each point, we extract the line properties and their orientation and their position properties. And then we use this descriptor. This is exactly the same descriptor that we use for the MNIST handwritten digit problem. So what you see here is R is referring to the orientation tolerant COSFIRE filter. In this case, filter 1 up to filter lambda. We have lambda number of filters. And then we simply take the maximum response for each filter. So if we have 1,000 filters, this descriptor consists of 1,000 elements for one image. And then again, we used SVM with linear kernels, simple machine learning algorithm to do the classification. Okay, this diagram shows the full pipeline of the training phase. So we started from an imbalanced training set, by the way, but we draw equal number of training samples from each class. And then we use them to configure some COSFIRE filters. And the way it works is you randomly draw a balanced subset, apply COSFIRE filters with or without rotation variance, create descriptors. We normalize using L2 normalization, the feature descriptors, and then we do we learn the SVM model. And the inference phase is once you have an image, you apply all the COSFIRE filters, you normalize them, and then we apply, well, in this case, we are using a bagging approach that deals with an imbalanced data set. So here we have multiple SVMs, actually. And finally, we aggregate by taking the majority vote. Well, because of the time, I will not go into this technical detail, but we fine-tuned some hyperparameters in a cross-validation approach. And eventually, we report the results here. So when we apply the filters without rotation variance, this is the performance that we get. And when we apply them with rotation variance, the performance increases substantially. The maximum performance was achieved with 93 filters, per class. And I also showed the results with 48 to indicate that here was the result obtained with our competitor in the literature. So the best result in the state of the art was somewhere here, which we could achieve with roughly half of the filters. And then we were able to beat that performance with more filters. Well, here I'm showing some graphs that correspond to the efficiency of these filters, because you may wonder, okay, but how about the efficiency of these filters? The more we have, of course, the more computations we need to do. But in fact, when you analyze the tuples of each filters, you will find out that many tuples are actually the same across many filters. They share many tuples that are the same. So we can leverage this and we compute them once, keep them in memory, and then the processing can be done much faster. So in fact, the blue line is indicating the total number of tuples as you increase the number of filters. Of course, it increases linearly, but the number of unique tuples, when we apply them with rotation variance, it has this logarithmic form. So it is a very efficient way of scaling. Okay. So this is almost the last slide. I have 2 more slides, I think. So a comparison with the few-shot learning, which is also a famous paradigm in the deep learning approach. This is also very effective when you have few training examples. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Of course, I also use it in other projects, this paradigm. It's a very effective, but the problem with it is it's also a black box. It's sensitive to noise and perturbations, and it's not inherently robust to adversarial attacks and different orientations. And this is what we are trying to address with this approach. It has high level of interpretability because the reconstruction of the filters can be easily interpreted. Rotation variance and more robustness. This is some work in progress, which I can skip now. And okay, some take-home messages. So, okay, COSFIRE is not an end-to-end paradigm learning approach like deep learning, but it is still trainable. It is different than handcrafted features because COSFIRE filters can be trained by any patterns that are given to the algorithm. It does not require many training examples. It is interpretable and effective in various computer vision applications, as I demonstrated. Another project that I'm developing is based on inhibition. Where in the mammalian brain, we also have neurons that inhibit the responses of other neurons. And we are also developing this concept in these filters, but that's for another time. Well, that concludes my story for today. I hope you could relate some of it to your ongoing work, but feel free to ask me any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, George, for the very nice overview of research in Groningen. Thank you very much. Are there questions in the audience? Yeah, just a second.
For the radio galaxy recognition, or so what is the starting point of training? You started from some existing images that for known radio galaxy and somehow and
yes. So we used a benchmark data set, something that has been used by other researchers already. So we would be able to compare the results with them. So the training set was given, this column. We're given more than 300 from this class, well, of this class, and so forth. So there were 4 types of galaxies. These are already labeled in the training set. Okay, and then we were picking randomly some images from each class. Suppose we want to configure only 1 filter per class. Then we pick 1 image from the compact class, 1 image from the FRI1 class, and so forth. And then we configure a filter with the pattern based in the middle of this image. So in this case, it would be based on the pattern somewhere here. And another one somewhere here for this class, and another one for this one. So we end up with 4 COSFIRE filters. Then when we have a new image, we apply all those filters because we don't know what it is, right? So we apply them all. But we do not try to make a decision based on which filter gave the maximum response, because that would not be reliable enough in this case. But we use the maximum responses to form a feature descriptor. So we have 4 values in this simple example. And then we feed that into a machine learning classifier, like SBM, decision tree, whatever, to do the classification for us based on those values.
So and then you're able to use this algorithm to apply it to a larger catalog and somehow.
Well, in this case, we use this benchmark data set. Then we applied it on this test data set. It's not a big data set, roughly 100 images per class, to demonstrate, well, the effectiveness of the approach.
But I think my final question is, or the crucial question is, can you use this to recognize some new galaxy or find new galaxies that were not recognized before? I mean, how astronomy would benefit from that? I mean, would you have more samples that or from data mining from the existing catalog that you can find more galaxies? I mean, that would benefit astronomy.
Yeah, I understand your question. No, in this case, this paradigm will not be able to find galaxies that are not known. It is only a supervised approach, which is able to find, well, what we already know. But think of it, suppose you do a survey, and then you want to label the galaxies in an automatic way. And this approach can help in doing that, rather than trying to find new objects.
Thank you. There is a question from an online participant. Emmanuel, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Prof. And big well done to Professor George. That was a beautiful one. My first question is, how does your algorithm COSFIRE compare in terms of the element of the feature vector now? How does it compare with traditional methods like histogram of oriented gradient, which normally would have 81 elements, and also linear binary patterns that may have variable number of elements? That's my first question. And then my second question is, did you make efforts to incorporate the filters in maybe a CNN, a convolutional neural network pipeline or architecture, in order to establish how well it can do representation learning? That's my second question. And thirdly, do you have the source code for the COSFIRE method available, maybe on GitHub or any open source platform? Thank you. Beautiful presentation.
Thanks for your questions. I start with the last one, which is easy. Yes, there is the algorithm online. For your first question, how it compares with other handcrafted features such as LBP, HOG, and others. Well, we compared it with one specific application on the gender recognition, and we demonstrated that we can achieve better results. But in general, this approach is more versatile than any other handcrafted features because they are configured based on the patterns that are given to the algorithm, rather than the algorithm is predefined in advance, like LBP, or it's already handcrafted what you have to expect. But in our case, we extract the features from whatever pattern we receive, and they are much more interpretable in this sense. I'm not sure if I understood your second question. So if you can repeat it, please.
Okay, yeah. Talking about machine-crafted learning, that's, of course, you know, CNN has its own inbuilt filters. So did you make effort to also incorporate your COSFIRE inside maybe a CNN architecture to see how well it can do machine-crafted feature extraction?
As you know, CNN architectures, they rely on linear filters. Here, COSFIRE filters, they are non-linear, but however, we are indeed doing an effort in incorporating this idea, but not what I showed you today. It's more related to the inhibition that I indicated at the end of my presentation. We are trying to incorporate the inhibition concept within convolutional neural networks to make them more robust against corruptions and perturbations. But yeah, I can refer you to a couple of publications that we have. Maybe I can share them with you offline after this presentation.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you very much. That's
Okay,
good.
Manu. George, considering the time, I would like to thank you very much on behalf of all of us, virtual and real,
Great
for
pleasure.
your talk. And I would like to give you a magazine that NITheCS co-publishes about mathematics and its uses. So thank
Thank you very much. Thanks. I appreciate it.
you very much. Okay. Yeah.